परब्रह्मा साक्षात् परब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः।
We are in the midst of our study of Aristotle. When we go to Aristotle, we must essentially have Plato's concept in our mind. Plato's theory of ideas posits one cardinal feature. Ideas live in a transcendental world of their own, meaning ideas do not live in this phenomenal world. And the world of ideas alone is real, not our world. It is not real. It is ephemeral, it is illusory. He does not use the word illusory, it is ephemeral. It is not real, it is unreal, ordinarily understood. Ideas live there. They somehow come, put their impression, go, as you saw the process. Meaning matter and ideas. Socrates called it concept, Plato calls it idea, Aristotle calls it essence. Matter and essence, the world of essence or the world of ideas alone is real. And as I told you, Aristotle, departure from Socrates is not gentle in the sense he talks very vigorously about his difference from his master Plato. He is true also. Let us take an example. I have a glass tumbler in my hand. I dash it violently against the wall. It will be broken into 1,000 pieces, isn't it? You pick up any piece, big, small. Each piece is glass, no doubt, but each piece has a shape of its own. It may be sharp, it may be oblong, it may be round, it may be any shape, but shape there is. Without shape, without form, without idea, you cannot conceive of any matter in this phenomenal world. Plato says, matter and form are not together in this phenomenal world. Aristotle asserts, there cannot be any matter without some form or the other. This is his departure from his teacher. It stands to common sense also. What does it lead us to? It tells us what Plato tells us, form being in a transcendental world, is a cock and bull story. Forms have got to be essentially in this phenomenal world also, otherwise we cannot conceive of matter at all. There can be no matter empirically in our waking experience without some form or the other. But we can conceive, we can think of a pure form also if we have a look at his evolutionary process. Aristotle is also called the father of evolution. Darwin came much later. He evolved the evolutionary theory also. And there is evolution in Aristotle's metaphysics. Creation is an ongoing process. It is not static, it is dynamic, it is moving. But it is not moving capriciously, it is moving according to a law. It is moving to the attainment of a purpose, it is not haphazard or needless. If you look at it from another point of view, it is a determined process. It is governed and guided process. He uses the word teleological. Teleological word is from the language only, very simple word, teleos. T-E-L-E-O-S. Teleos means purpose. What is the purpose? That is teleos, and teleological means which serves the purpose, which is purposive. All movement is teleological. It is not haphazard. It is willed to the attainment of a purpose, of a design. Aristotle says, the egg of a hen is determined from within to be a chick and not a duck. The egg will throw up a chick only, not a duck, nothing else, because it is determined from within. There is no agency or force from outside. From within itself it is determined to be a chick only. This is teleological movement. It is to the attainment of a purpose. What is the purpose? If you observe and study the evolutionary process before your very eyes, you will find there has been a progressive dropping down of more and more of matter and assumption of a higher and higher form. Form may be very simple, as in the first created objects, the jellyfish, the amoeba, the lower animals. Form may be very complicated and complex, as in a man who is rationally determined, who has a very complicated structure of mind and nerves. From the lower to the higher, from a simpler form to a higher form, that is the process of evolution. And from the simpler to the higher form, when you go, it is always the dropping down of matter, more and more of matter. We read in history books, at the beginning, at the so-called beginning of the world, there were very mighty creatures on the bed of the sea, bed of the ocean, as mighty as small hillocks. They have all disappeared in course of evolution. From the bulky to the subtle, mighty elements means very bulky, too much of matter, dross, in our word, tamas. The evolutionary process consists in the dropping down of this tamas, this flab, in the course of creation, evolution, and the assumption of a higher and higher form, meaning more and more complicated form, meaning there is progress towards a more complicated form, there is retrogress about possession of matter. Meaning matter and form both go together, as Aristotle tells us, and as it stands to common sense also. But all the same there is movement, and as we told you, movement is purposive, it is teleological, it is not haphazard, it is not willful, it is not capricious, it is designed and determined. The intention is the dropping down of more and more of matter and the acquisition of a higher and higher, more complicated form. This is the process you have seen. Take it like this. You have a 100 rupee note in your pocket, supposing. You spend 1 rupee every day. What will happen after 100 days? What will happen after 100 days? You will be left with no money, isn't it? In the evolutionary process, you are dropping down matter progressively. What shall happen at the end of the evolutionary process? No matter shall be left with you, and only form, the highest form will be left with you, which is not available to you in the phenomenal world. But you can imagine it, you can think of it, you can conceive of it. It is not possible to have pure form in the world. It is possible to conceive it. The evolutionary process is towards this. More and more of form, higher and higher of form, less and less of matter. This is the entire process. This is the goal. This is the destination. You cannot have pure form in the physical world yourself, concretely, but you can surely conceive of it, you can think of it, you can imagine it. This is the evolutionary process which he posits. And this evolutionary process is determined. It is not haphazard, it is not wavered, it is guided, it is controlled, it is governed. Governed to the attainment of the purpose of pure form, bereft of all vestige of matter. That is the evolutionary process. Very well. You have heard the account of the evolutionary process. You have also heard it is purposive, it is teleological. Who manages and assures this attainment of the purpose? Who has put the purpose? The process cannot put the purpose into itself. Who has put the purpose in it? And how is it also guided? If it is guided, if it is controlled, who does it all? You read in Plato, God has a very superfluous place in his philosophy. I stressed upon it the other day. God does not occupy a central place in Plato's philosophy. God occupies a most prominent place in Aristotle's philosophy. God is all in all. But what does God do? If you say it is God who manages the evolutionary process, it is God who has put the purpose in the process, who sees to its working properly, fairly, successfully, then God does not remain to be God as we think of him. God is the possibility of all fulfilled desires and ambitions. Nothing remains for God to realize and wish and experience. He is the sum total of every possibility realized. If there is any vestige left in God to be realized, he is not God. He or it, whatever pronoun you use, is not God. Appetite remaining with the sentient being, with the living being, is a mark of inadequacy, is a mark of non-fulfillment, and God cannot be that. And Aristotle's God is a very formidable concept. He is all in all. This evolutionary process, even if we exceed, once given the lift, once given the push, it may continue. It does continue. The law of physics also tells us this thing. If you throw a thing and if there is no resistance in between, the thing will go on moving. There is resistance of air, this, that, everything, and so at the end it stops. If there is no resistance, it would not stop. But who gives the initial push in any case? Who gives the first push? And he has a wonderful answer to it. He says, as the sight of the beloved object moves the lover, as the sight of the beloved object moves the lover, God gives the first push. There is no physical activity involved when a lover moves a lover, another lover. It is done in silence, it is done in secret, it is done solemnly. That is the way God moves the world and manages the creative process. God moves the world. This activity God does. God is deficient. Why do you do any activity? To realize a purpose, to realize an aim. If you have no aim, you don't do any activity. If God gives the push, then God has something to realize. There is an appetite left in God, and that is no God. He says, as I told you, as the sight of the beloved object moves the lover, God does not put in any activity. It is carried on its own, and therefore God remains the unmoved mover. Unmoved mover. God moves the creative process, but Himself does not move. Himself remains unmoved. That is why He says He is the unmoved mover. The first push is given by the love sight of God. It may be new for you. Have you read the Sankhya philosophy in Indian philosophy? You have the same concept in Sankhya philosophy. How does Prakriti evolve? Purush and Prakriti are the two fundamental elements in Sankhya system. How does Prakriti evolve? Who gives the first push? The sight of Purusha falls on Prakriti and she starts evolving. The same concept you have there also. It is in Aristotle also. It starts evolving. Matter is Prakriti. Form is the realization of the purpose, higher and higher and higher and higher purpose, till the end, meaning pure form. You cannot have pure form practically, concretely in the physical world, but you can think of it, you can imagine it. Sitting in an armchair, you can think of pure form and you can think that to be God. God therefore remains the unmoved mover. There is another problem. Who is the cause of all these things? You may ask me, I say, God doesn't do anything, God does not do any activity, and God cannot, by simple definition. Activity means to the fulfillment of a desire, and if there is desire, He is no God. He is like us only. Who is the cause of all this? Ordinarily also, if I take an example, if I take an egg in my hand and ask you, what is the cause of this egg? You will say the hen. The cause of the hen, another egg. The cause of another egg, another hen. How long would you go on like this? It will not end. Another egg, another hen, another egg, another hen. It will not end anywhere. You may die. The argument will not end. So in order to escape this predicament, this difficult situation, which we call infinite regress, go on, endlessly, to escape it, at some point, somehow we decide to stop. We simply decide. There is no reason why we decide it, but we decide it. All right, beyond this we will not go, and this we will take to be the first principle, the first thing. That we will decide. This is called escape from infinite regress. Infinite means endless. Regress means going back and back and back like this. We escape it. So, to escape infinite regress, we say, God is also the uncaused cause. God is also the uncaused cause. There is no cause of God. There is always a cause in the phenomenal world. For every cause, I am reminded of an incident which happened here in the ashram maybe 50, 60 years ago. Some very reverend Swamiji visited the ashram and he delivered a lecture. I also was one in the audience. He said there is a cause of everything. The son has a father, his cause, the father has his own father, and his own father, and like this he went on. He talked very brilliantly. God is the father of the whole thing, he said. As usually we all do, at the end he invited questions. I am not used to asking questions, but somehow a friend of mine pushed me ahead and forced me to ask a question. I asked him, Swamiji, you have explained the process of the whole world and said, God is the father of the whole world. By the way, who is the father of God? He was naturally flabbergasted, as we all would be. This, is entering into infinite regress, this type of argument. To escape it, Aristotle says, God is the causeless cause, meaning that cause which does not have a cause of its own. It is theoretical assumption, that's all. There is no proof for it, but you have to stop somewhere. How long can you go on? God, you have seen, has two attributes, unmoved mover and uncaused cause. Meaning, God does not do anything. You should not be discourteous, otherwise you can use the word, he is an idler. He indeed is an idler. Aristotle's God is an idler, and he is likened to the King of England. The King of England reigns, does not rule. He is king in name, but he doesn't do anything. Meaning he has no rights, no powers. Aristotle is also that way very popular with English people, and his God is also likened to the King of England. You have seen the evolutionary process being teleological, being guided and governed by the will of God, and it is all to attain to a purpose, to be pure form. Pure form is the nature and structure of God. I should also tell you a little more about the process, the evolutionary process as determined in Aristotelian philosophy. He uses the word entelechy, E-N-T-E-L-E-C-H-Y, E-N-T-E-L-E-C-H-Y, entelechy. Entelechy word he has used. Entelechy means to be determined from within. Your nature and structure is such that only this will come, nothing else can come up. The egg will develop into a chick only because the nature and structure is like this. Only a chick can be thrown up and not another duck or anything else. Entelechy is a very central word in Aristotle, and all his evolutionary process is determined by it. That is how this process goes on. And the purpose at the end is the realization of pure form. Pure form means all desires, all appetites, all cravings and yearnings stand fulfilled and satisfied. That is the end of the world. When we talk of the creative process, it is of the world, the individual is in it. That is the full satiation, full satisfaction, gratification, and man becomes like God. Above all desire, all pinings and cravings, all yearnings, above all this, meaning nothing remains for man also to realize. This can be visualized, this can be imagined, this shall be realized at the end of the creative process. This is the story of the evolutionary process which Aristotle has given us. There is one more topic in Aristotle which is only a part of what you have learned so far. We can attend to that. He has given an elaborate theory of causation. Causation. He has talked of causation in details. We will only look at it in a summary manner. He says there are 4 causes to any effect. Cause and effect, you understand, effect is that which is generated by something which is called cause. There are 4 types of causes, 4 causes to everything, he says, to every effect, and they are material cause, efficient cause, formal cause, final cause. I will repeat, don't be impatient. To understand anything, it is always desirable that we take an example and by the aid and assistance of it, we try to learn it. Say there is this table by my side. This is a completed effect. It is a finished and cut thing. I want to study its sequence of cause. As I told you, the first cause is the material cause. Material cause means the stuff of which it is made. It is made of wood. Therefore, the material cause is the wood. Clear? The material cause of the table is wood. Then comes the efficient cause. Wood is given to you, but that doesn't give you the table. To turn wood, raw wood say, into a table, we need the services of a man who knows the art of making the table, meaning the carpenter. We need the services of the carpenter. The carpenter will order the wood given to him into the shape of a table. That is the efficient cause. But the carpenter by himself can do nothing. He will not whisper a magic formula and the table would come into being. He will have to work with his tools upon the material given to him. An efficient cause, therefore, is the worker, the expertise, plus the tools required. This is very important. The tools required are essential. Without the tools required, you need the tools. Man alone cannot do anything, howsoever expert he may be. With the assistance of tools only, he can turn the wood given to him into a table. Okay? Material cause, efficient cause. The third is the formal cause. Formal cause means which size of table you want. So much long, so much high, so much broad, this, that. All these dimensions, form is given to you. That you thrust upon the material given to you, and you have the table. This is your formal cause. The form, the essence, the shape, the dimensions, the measurements you have given to the table. The fourth is the final cause. Why did you want the table? That was the question. The requirement was you needed a table so that you could write conveniently by putting your notebook on it. You could eat your food comfortably by putting it on the table, or relaxing or putting your foot on it. Whatever the purpose, you had the purpose in mind. To the fulfillment of a purpose which you had in mind, you needed a table, and therefore you went in for having one. Manufacturing one, getting it manufactured, it is the same thing. You needed the table. This purpose, is the final cause which inspired you, which initiated you into action to have a table. This is the fourth purpose: material, efficient, formal, and final. This final purpose can be served only after the table has come into being. Before bringing the table into being, you cannot serve the purpose. Therefore, the final purpose is at the end, but truly it is at the beginning. The first starting point, the first inspiration is this fulfillment, the desire to fulfill this particular purpose. The purpose was you may be able to write comfortably by putting your notebook on it. This purpose was there. This purpose was the starting point. This purpose was the beginning of the whole effort. Though it came at the end, chronologically, in the sequence of time, it came at the end. After the table is manufactured and finished, then only you can have your purpose fulfilled. But initially, it started the whole process. So, the final purpose, though appears to be at the end, it is at the beginning also. All final purpose of the creative process is at the beginning. What is the final purpose of the creative process? That we may all be pure forms, bereft of all desire, all appetites, all cravings. This final purpose is at the beginning, to be pure form. All evolutionary process is to the attainment of this goal, to be pure form, and that is also the rationale of evolutionary process and the design also of the evolutionary process. This is all about Aristotle, you have to know. Hari Om.